You hear all the time about women being denied access to positions of power, and that's the consequence of prejudice and oppression. It's like, yeah, everything is caused by the same thing first, right? You have got one causal principle, wonderful, now you're a philosopher. You can figure out everything with it. It's like the law firms cannot keep their women in their 30s. They cannot keep them, the big law firms. They all leave. Why? Because the women hit 30, they're brilliant, conscientious, intelligent, they were deadly in high school, deadly in university, they nailed law school, they whipped through their articling, they made partner by the time they were 30. It was like they're in a rocket to the top position. What do they find when they get there? 80-hour work weeks, right? Because that's one of the things you want to think about. You think that the people who run things are sitting at home smoking big cigars and like telling their minions what to do. It's like that's like the 1920s millionaire that's on the cover of the Monopoly game. That's no sociological analysis. I know lots of people like that, and they work all the time, from the second they wake up till the second they go to sleep. And they don't just casually work. Because I know some of you go to the library for 6 hours and you say, well, I studied in the library for 6 hours. Like, no, you didn't. You studied for half an hour. And you had coffee and you looked through Facebook and, you went home and you said, well, I studied for 6 hours and you're happy about it. But bloody well you didn't. Partly because you can't. I can only read for about 3.5 hours till I'm done. And I'm pretty good at it. So these people who are running things, there's corrupt people, obviously, but the vast majority of them, first, are self-made, and second, they're so bloody efficient and smart, you cannot believe it. And they work 80 hours a week. And most of them happen to be men. And why is that? Because there are a small number of insane men who will do nothing but work 80 hours a week. And no matter where you put them, if you put them in the middle of a forest with an axe, all they would do is run around chopping down trees. So the issue isn't why aren't there more women in positions of power? It's why are there any men insane enough ever to occupy those positions? Because we also know, and the data on this is very clear, what's the relationship between money and well-being? Once you have enough money to keep the bill collectors from your door, so once you have enough money to stave off misery, which is sort of lower middle class, something like that in our society, maybe a little lower than that, extra money does not help you. It does not improve your life. So why bother with it? Well, that's what the women in the law firms think. It's like most of them, by the time they're in their 30s, are married. Almost all of them are married to men who make as much money or more than they do, because that's what women go for cross-culturally. 4 to 5 years older, equal or higher in the socioeconomic status. So their husbands already make $350,000 a year. It's like they think, well, I don't need much more money. The men use money to keep track of the competition, by the way, because all the male lawyers that I talk to are usually real hard-ass guys, really low in agreeableness, really high in conscientiousness, like conservative types, low in openness as well. And they want to win. And the reason they care about their damn bonus at the end of the year isn't even so much because of the money, it's because they got a much bigger bonus than the other son of a bitch sitting beside them, and they're happy about that.
I remember, one of the things that stuck with me is I had a guy that was a traditional martial artist, very, very great guy, and actually was a SEAL. And he was a traditional martial artist, and, I was like a basic jiu-jitsu guy at the time. And, we decided to figure out which one worked better, right? And, so it was me as a year-long jiu-jitsu guy against a guy that had been training in his martial art for 20 years. He's, older than me, bigger than me. And, of course, jiu-jitsu won because jiu-jitsu is better. And so then, of course, you get well, let's go again. And that's what happens with jiu-jitsu. When you get somebody once, they think, oh, you got lucky or whatever. So then you go again. And it usually takes 3 to 5 times before people recognize that, okay, there's something here that I don't understand, and this person will beat me. And so we got through the 3 to 5 repetitions of me submitting him, and so now he's kind of a little bit frustrated and flustered and bummed out because in his reality is hitting him that he's wasted 20 years of his life training in this stuff that doesn't work. And so as he was scratching to kind of find what he could hold on to, he said to me, well, the thing about, what I do is it's not just about fighting. it teaches you discipline and humility. And at the time, you know, I was a young, stupid kid, and I was like, whatever. You know, I'll still beat you up, so it doesn't matter. But I held on to that, and I thought about it. And as I continued to train jiu-jitsu more and more, and especially when I started working with kids, I realized that what the other older traditional martial arts did to train you in humility and discipline and things of that nature, jiu-jitsu absolutely teaches you humility, because you will get submitted by people on a regular basis, people that are smaller than you, people that are weaker than you, and that is a very humbling experience. So you will absolutely learn humility through jiu-jitsu. And the discipline piece, it absolutely takes discipline to go and get on that mat on a daily basis and improve yourself. And if, you know, there's some saying about getting your black belt, and it's a very, very tiny percentage of people that start jiu-jitsu that get their black belt. And that's because it takes discipline. And if you don't have discipline and you don't learn discipline, you'll never get there. So those kind of conceptual things that they had in traditional martial arts, I think and as the traditional martial arts lost their realism, they held on to these conceptual ideas that are found in jiu-jitsu, in Muay Thai, in wrestling. They're found there because they're real, and they're a real element of them. And that's another reason beyond self-defense to...
The first thing you have to understand with regards to trying to come to terms with the conception of the shadow is to understand the idea of persona. And persona is the you that you present when you want people to accept and like you. Often like. Let's say that you go to a party and you're trying to impress the people that are there, and you're trying to get them to like you. And so you maybe get jabbed at a little bit, and you laugh, and you know you go along with everyone so that they like you, and then you go home and you're bitterly resentful about the way that you were put down at this party. And that's going to make all sorts of aggressive, I wish I could have said, it's going to make all sorts of aggressive and vengeful thoughts sort of flash through your imagination. Well, the first part of the problem is that you were too much persona, right? You sacrificed yourself in some sense at the party so that people would like you. And in the second part, you're refusing to admit to the existence of those elements of you that would have actually protected you from doing that. So let's say you go home and you're all bitter and resentful and you have fantasies of revenge. I mean, that reveals to you the shadow part of you that's aggressive. And the thing is, you actually need that, because if you would have integrated that more successfully into your personality, when you went to the party, you wouldn't have had to let people put you down to get them to like you. You know, instead of having a face like this, which says, I'll take anything that's coming my way, you know, you have a face and a stance that's more determined and assertive. And if you manifest that properly, people aren't going to mess with you to begin with. But, you know, you may have already adopted a morality that says, well, I have to be likable, and I shouldn't do anything that causes any conflict, and I shouldn't ever, you know, hurt anybody's feelings. And so you're just to present yourself as a punching bag, and you think that that makes you a good person, but it doesn't. And there's no integration of the shadow in that situation. So you see that at the end of the movie, you know, when I mentioned this, when Simba climbs up the rock to take control of it, all the female lionesses bare their teeth, and he roars. It's like that aggressiveness is integrated into him. And so resentment is a really good emotion for making contact with the shadow side, because if you're resentful about something, it basically reveals two things. It either means that you're immature and you should stop whining and get on with things. You know, someone's asked, this often happens with adolescents who are asked, say, by their mother to clean up their room. They get all resentful about it. It's like, shut up and clean up your room. You know, it's not that much to ask. Or, so that can be a gateway into the observation of your own immaturity. Or it's possible that you're resentful because people really have been poking at you too much and taking cheap shots at you and oppressing you. But what that means is that you've got some things to say that you haven't been willing to say or don't know how to say, right? You can't stand up for yourself properly. And in order to do that, you have to grow some teeth.
and be willing to use them. And again, that's something that might violate your morality, because you might say, well, I shouldn't be able to bite people. And the thing is, yes, you should be able to bite people hard. And if you're able to bite them, then generally you don't have to. And then with regards to books, it's like, read, don't highlight, don't underline. Like that, I think that that's just rubbish. I think it's pseudo work. Read a couple of paragraphs or maybe an essay, something like that, depending on the density of the book. Close the book. Think about it. Write down what you're thinking. Write down what you remember. But in the context of what you're thinking about, because that instantiates it into your memory and puts it at hand. Like, people ask me, for example, how it is that I can remember all the things that I talk about extemporaneously when I'm lecturing. And the reason for that is because I've thought them through. You know, I read them and I think, oh, okay, well, that's an interesting idea. How does it relate to all these other ideas that I know? Like, what is its significance for this idea? And what's its significance for this idea? And do I believe it? And how might I criticize it? So it's kind of like I'm attaching little memory hooks to it in 5 different ways. And then I've got it. It's part of me. And that seems to be part of recall rather than recognition. And recall is the spontaneous act of remembering something complex. And when you recall something, you're actually practicing remembering it. And that's what you need to do if you want that to be part of you.
So there's a real brass knuckles competition that drives these sorts of things. But we get things backwards so often in psychology and in sociology. It's not why there aren't more women in positions of power. It's why do any men want those positions? You just have no idea the amount of responsibility that comes along with that. You just imagine for a minute trying to run $1 billion corporation. You can't even bloody well balance your checkbook, and there's dust bunnies underneath your bed. How in the world would you ever run $1 billion corporation? Those things are complicated. And you have enemies, and they're trying to take you out all the time. You look at Apple and Samsung, man, they're just torturing each other in the courts nonstop. You know, if you're running a big corporation, you'll be handling 200 or 300 lawsuits at a time. And that's just nothing compared to the complexity of what you actually have to do. Stay on top of the technology, constantly interact with your large customers, travel all the time because you have to maintain the relationships. You have to regulate the politics inside the business. Believe me, it's no picnic. And you think, well, they get a lot of money. It's like, what makes you think that's such a good thing? You know, like if you're half crazy and you have a lot of money, you're going to be crazy a lot faster, I can tell you that. Because it frees you from all sorts of constraints. You know, we know the data on lottery winners. They're no happier a year later, and some of them are done. Especially if they had like a bit of a cocaine problem to begin with. Because, you know, being broke stops you from dying if you're a cocaine addict. You get enough money and away you go. And you think to yourself, you know, you've got all sorts of bad habits and weirdnesses. If somebody dumped an infinite amount of money on you, what makes you think you wouldn't unravel completely? It's highly probable. So, anyway, so back to these women. You know, what they do when they're 30 is they look around and they've hit partners, so they've hit the pinnacle of their profession. They think, what the hell am I doing this for? Why would anyone in their right mind want to be woken up at 3 in the morning Sunday by their irate Japanese client who wants them to work for the next 5 hours non-stop to fix this damn problem, which is going to cost them $100 million right now? Or we'll find someone else to pay $750 an hour to fix it right now. And you think, well, that's, you know, a masculine form of value, because that's one of the criticisms. If the law firms just adopted a more feminine structure of value, it's like, what kind of bullshit is that? The reason that you get up at 3 in the morning on Sunday to talk to your Japanese client who's freaking out about their contract is because if you don't jump the hell up and do it right now, there's some starving associate who's unbelievably ambitious in New York who will pick up the pieces in 0.2 of a second, and they're smart and aggressive and they'll take you out. So it has nothing to do with masculine structures of value. It's all the foolish ideas. And you know, it's not just law where this happens. You know, we know, for example, that female doctors work far fewer hours too. So the more female doctors you have, the more doctors you have to have. And I'm not complaining about women's priorities. I'm not saying the women are wrong. Not at all. It's like the older I get, the more I understand that marriage and family are of primary importance. And the more I see women in particular, they hit 35 or 40 and they're not married and they don't have kids and they are not happy. Because what the hell are you going to do from the time you're 40 till the time you're 80? You got no family? You got no relationships? What are you going to do? Go run your company. Yeah, well, if you're 1 in 1,000, that'll satisfy you. So you bloody well better make sure you're that 1 in 1,000, and you're probably not, because those people are rare. So
then, because Dr. Peterson, one of the natural responses to what you just said would be, okay, well, the priorities are, it's a rigged game because only women are the ones who are able to procreate. So what do we answer to that?
Of course it's a rigged game. Obviously it's a rigged game. Women have complicated lives and the pill has made them more complicated. Well, that's not, I wouldn't say that exactly because, 100 years, in 1895, the average person in the Western world lived on $1 a day in today's money. Okay, so those people worked so hard and slaved away to such a degree that you can't even imagine it, and all their kids died, right? So the death rate among kids below 5 was beyond comprehension, and so women had a terrible time of it, and well, so did men. They got to be coal miners and soldiers, because that wasn't exactly entertaining, so life was very, 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 very hard before we got rich, and we're rich. Even those of you who are in this class who think you're poor, it's like, oh, no you're not. You're in the top 1/10 of 1% by historical standards, and probably there by current world standards as well. Of course, you can just compare yourself to the few people who are richer than you and feel sorry for yourself, but that's pretty pathetic in my estimation. So it's certainly historically uninformed. So yeah, women have it rough, obviously. Now, there's other things to consider. You do live 8 years longer. So that's not trivial. Testosterone kills men. That's basically why men die earlier. And men are much more likely to be killed in dangerous jobs. They do almost all the dangerous jobs. They do almost all the outside work. And there's lots of reasons that men get paid more than women that have nothing to do with prejudice. It's because they take awful, horrible jobs, like working in the oil rigs in northern Alberta when it's bloody 40 below, and come out of that after 5 years with 2 or 3 fingers missing and all warped up. Because you really want to wrestle pipe when it's 40 below and it's filthy with a bunch of ornery men who are hungover beyond belief. It's like, that's not very entertaining. So yeah, each gender, each sex has its own unfairness to deal with, but to think of that as a consequence of the social structure, it's like, come on, really? What about nature itself? And this is something that seems to be completely invisible on the left side of the political spectrum.